Hello to all our participants. We would like to begin the program. Good afternoon to all our attendees from the East Coast, and good morning to our West Coast participants. Does culture spark innovation? That's the question that we're going to tackle today. My name is Dina Wachtel, and together with my co-host Ayala Davis and all our colleagues here at Canadian Friends of Hebrew University, we want to welcome you to this program that will offer us plenty of food for thought. Our panelists include Professor Gad Yair from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Yossef Av-Gay from UBC, Dr. Sarah Lubik from SFU, Mr. Gilad Babchuk, social entrepreneur, and our moderator, Paul Cuban from the Sauter School of Business at UBC. They will all be further introduced shortly. Before we start the panel discussion, I just want to remind everyone to please feel free to write your questions in the Q&A box, and our moderator will be able to see them and include them in our upcoming discussion. Now, for opening remarks, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Joy Johnson, Vice President, Research and International at Simon Fraser University, and the incoming President and Vice Chancellor of SFU. I had the pleasure of visiting the Hebrew University of Jerusalem with Dr. Johnson in 2018. Dr. Johnson leads SFU's strategic research initiatives and facilitates international opportunities. She focuses on facilitating research excellence and helping the university respond to new opportunities. She's a leader for the SFU Innovates Initiative, a university-wide strategy to inspire, develop, and support impact-driven innovation and entrepreneurship. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you so much, Dina. It's so great to see you, even though it's virtually today. And I want to welcome everyone who's joining us today. I'm really pleased that we can be together. So welcome to all of you to the virtual panel discussion, Can Culture Spark Innovation? It's organized by Canadian Friends of Hebrew University of Jerusalem in partnership with Simon Fraser University, the Sauter School of Business, and the Vancouver Israeli Tech Club. So really fantastic to have all these partners coming together. This event was originally intended to take place at the Simon Fraser University WASC Center for Dialogue. And I want to extend my thanks to Dina and our colleagues at Hebrew University and SFU International for putting this event together despite the difficulties the world is facing. My thoughts are with all of you who've lost loved ones or who are struggling to make it through the day. I think we're all experiencing personal challenges. All of us are trying to navigate through this time of uncertainty as this pandemic has disrupted not only our professional lives, but all areas of our lives. So like the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, SFU is committed to engaging with the broader communities we serve and innovating in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So taking advantage of opportunities such as this event is exactly one of the critical steps in moving forward during this time. Moving the panel discussion online rather than canceling the event has allowed us to extend the invitation across Canada and beyond, and I'm really pleased about that. We brought a more diverse audience together to this talk that would have not been otherwise possible. It's great that we are extending the audience. I want to really thank in particular Dina Wachtel for making this event possible, so thanks, Dina. As Dina mentioned, I recently had the privilege of visiting Hebrew University in 2018. Boy, that seems a long time ago now, considering all the events that have taken place in the world. I was so impressed by how innovation drives every aspect of the university, from its commitment to delivering entrepreneurship education to all their students, to its cutting-edge research and its technology transfer company, Yissam. Yissam was really particularly impressive to me. Founded in 1964, it's the third company of its kind ever created with this rich tradition of innovation and commercialization. And Hebrew is truly at the heart of Startup Nation, and I learned so much through this visit. Like Hebrew SFU doesn't just use innovation as a social buzzword. As Canada's engaged university, innovation to SFU means matching new ideas with market or societal needs. SFU Innovates, as Dina mentioned, is the university's innovation strategy, and it's helping our students, our researchers, our staff, and indeed our community mobilize their ideas for positive social and economic benefit. It is this lens through which we mobilize our learning, our research, and community engagement. We do this by convening diverse minds and cultivating robust partnerships. SFU and Hebrew University share a commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship, and beyond this, a commitment to making a positive impact on our broader communities and the world. With the challenges we are currently facing, I cannot emphasize enough that seeking new opportunities and investing in innovation across borders is of greater importance than ever before. Throughout today's panel discussion, I hope that you're inspired by what you hear, and I encourage you to continue this discussion with your respective communities. In these polarized times, connecting with each other, showing empathy of differences, collaborating on ideas and solutions is critically important. I'm thrilled to see so many of you here today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. So thank you so much, and back to you, Dina.
Thank you, Joy, for the warm welcome. We are so glad to have you here today and look forward to future collaborations, building bridges of knowledge between Canada and Israel. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Paul Cuban, who will be moderating the discussion today. Mr. Paul Cuban is the Assistant Dean of Innovation at the Sauder School of Business at UBC, a 3M Canada National Teaching Fellow. And for those of you who are not familiar, this is Canada's most prestigious recognition of excellence in educational leadership and teaching at the university and college level. Paul leads the Creative Destruction Lab West, an early stage program that spans 8 universities globally, which supports scientific founders to build high impact scalable ventures. Paul, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Dina, and thank you, everybody, and thanks for the welcoming words, Dr. Johnson. I'm also a proud SFU alum, and I take great pleasure from the collaboration between our 2 universities. So, you know, I was quite excited to be asked to take this role here and join together. You know, I think certainly on the innovation and entrepreneurship fronts, we see a lot of activity together, particularly in the last few years, and growing. So I think that bodes well for a discussion about culture and innovation. And so my first job today is to go into some introductions of our panelists and our keynote speaker, and then I'll get out of the way and let people kind of do what they do well. So first of all, you've heard the names of the people are here, but my role is to give you a little bit more flavor. So first of all, we have Gilad, Mr. Gilad Babchuk, who maybe give us a wave. Gilad is an educator, social entrepreneur with extensive global experience. He's founded or co-founded over 15 social enterprises. So you must be 112. You've been actively involved both on the academic and NGO side. So welcome, Gilad. We then have Professor Yossef Av-Gay, a microbiologist developing novel approaches to fight infections. We need people like you more than ever, as we've been reminded. So thank you for what you do, Professor Av-Gay. And Yossef's discoveries were licensed to pharmaceutical companies, providing the basis for several new companies. He and his partners in Canada and Israel have founded 2 startup companies, one of which is developing treatment for lung infections and is publicly traded. And then finally, I'd like to, before I get to our keynote speaker, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Lubik, SFU's first Director of Entrepreneurship, fantastic, and the Executive Director of the Charles Chang Institute for Entrepreneurship, that creates, aligns, and accelerates initiatives that unleash an interdisciplinary entrepreneurial mindset for positive impact. I've been fortunate to see some of the work that Sarah's team has done under Charles's funding in the elementary school area, and it's quite remarkable, I think, to see what young people can do. So congratulations on that work, Sarah. In 2016, Dr. Lubik was named one of 10 Canadian innovation leaders assisting with the Government of Canada's inclusive innovation agenda, and named a digital innovation leader in 2018. So this is all before we get to our keynote speaker. I feel kind of very privileged and fortunate to be amongst this talented group today. So finally, we get to our keynote speaker, Professor Gad Yair, a professor of sociology. Gad is on sabbatical at the MIT Sloan School of Business as an Israel Institute visiting professor. He was going to be coming into Vancouver, and we would, as Dr. Johnson said, have been here with us in Vancouver, but now more of you kind of geographically dispersed get to hear his talk today. Gad regularly serves in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has published 7 books and approximately 90 papers, many of which revolve around Israeli culture, education, and science. He serves in various administrative tasks, including the chair of his department, deputy dean, head of the NCJW Research Center for Innovation in Education. The list is long, and we're very privileged to have you here. Welcome, Gad, and you will now give your talk over the next little while, after which I'll ask you a kind of an initial question before we then open up to the audience. That's you out there, 124 people, my Zoom participant list says, and counting. The questions that you put in the Q&A, you can either ask generally or specifically to one of our panelists, and that will be the remainder of our session. And I think Pacific time, we run through to a close at about 11:30, so about 80 minutes from now. Without more ado, the floor is yours, Gad.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for this lovely introduction, and thank you all for taking me to Canada today. A day off from American riots is really what I need right now. You know, Boston is on flames. Let me move to my PowerPoint presentation page. There you go. On a flight, you won't believe it, to Canada last year, I had the occasion to watch the movie In Search of Greatness. The movie set to expose the secrets of superstar performance in sports. People in Edmonton probably know one of those superstars, the great one, Wayne Gretzky. Enthused by his personality and film, I watched Gretzky in a couple more films. And in each time I thought he was speaking about Israeliness. The secret codes of his excellence sounded very Israeli to me. Gretzky was talking about lessons from his father, like always being prepared for the game. But there were other lessons. My dad made sure, he said, that I always have love for the game. So please do write this down. Always have love for the game. I think part of it is in your blood, he added. It's in your DNA. It's a combination of excellence, and also they don't let that boy in them leave. So note this too. They do not let that boy in them leave. The greatest athletes in any sport really seem to enjoy the game when there seems to be more on the line. Childish enthusiasm, he concluded, is what separates superstars from stars. Love for the game and childish enthusiasm are some of the cultural codes which underlie the Israeli startup nation phenomena. Those codes motivate Israeli innovation and creativity. Rather than drowning you with information that I'm not the expert on, let me give you 34 seconds with a man who wrote the famous book about Israel, Startup Nation, Dan Sinor. Whatever he said then in 2009, please triple the numbers to get the update.
What's fascinating to us, Israel and the Middle East get a lot of coverage, but one side of the story that gets very little coverage is that Israel is the fastest growing, one of the most dynamic, entrepreneurial, and innovation-based economies on the planet that barely got hit by the global economic crisis in 2008. More Israeli companies on NASDAQ than all of Europe combined, than all of India, China, Korea, Japan combined. More global venture capital each year going into Israel on a per capita basis than the United States, 2.5 times more than the United States, 30 times more than Europe, even in 2008 when the global economy was melting down.
Allow me to share some thoughts about the cultural assets that set Israel as a startup nation. I bring to you voices from my studies of culture and scientific innovation in Israel. My interviewees, close to 300 scientists, are leading Israeli professors in the sciences and the humanities. I asked them to compare Israeli with German and American science. And though excellence in science is often evaluated by different standards from sports, you will soon hear how accurate Gretzky's secrets to excellence are. Let me begin with this dictum, always have love for the game. My analysis found that when Israeli scientists describe their vocation, they employ a rich vocabulary of love and passion words. I call it a language of fire. They speak of sparks of ideas, of burning flames of motivation, about an inner drive, an emotional drive that pushes them forward. They clearly have love for the game of science. As a senior chemist said, and whenever I have my hat on my head, it's a quote. So a senior chemist, I love my job all the time. I don't do any other thing, but I think of my studies all the time, all day. I mean, I really enjoy what I do, so it keeps me busy. I mean, this work is also my main hobby in the end. A microbiologist that thought that love for hobbies should actually be brought into the lab, as hobbies might enrich science. Don't be afraid of it. I like dance, he loves music, he likes to read books. Bring those interests in. Follow your passion, my interviewees say. Turn passion into your mission. They think that passionate motivations drive people to achieve more. As an Israeli archaeologist working in Germany said, it's a hobby. I always say to people in Israel, don't you dare complaining. The things you love most are your work. So how dare you complain? In Germany, it's different. They come to work in Germany, but in Israel, scientists love what they do. Another Israeli archaeologist who studied for his PhD in Germany agreed. I think it really characterizes all Israeli researchers in almost any field. That's right, we come to our studies with lots of emotion, with a sense of genuine curiosity, of genuine desire to connect with our history. So we are different from German scientists. Yes, we are. Let me remind you of an educational royal commission here in Canada, which published in 1994 a report, probably after speaking with Gretzky, titled For the Love of Learning. This is exactly the Israeli expectation. You do stuff because you love it, because you are passionate about it. Indeed, Israeli professors expect their students to love what they do too. This attitude contrasts with norms in German science, where passion is actually frowned upon. This point was corroborated by a chemist. A German doctoral student comes to work under conditions that an Israeli would never agree to. In Germany, there are strict working hours and reports, but they really come to work there. In contrast, an Israeli doctoral student enjoys a lot of freedom. This provides room for flourishing. I'm very picky about students, and I think I've always looked for students who are passionate about the project. A medical engineer pointed to the role of love and passion in his lab. He had a graduate student who worked on her dissertation. He worked on a different one. At some point, he said, after repeatedly telling her about his own project, her eyes lit up and his flame lit hers. And he said, at one point she became enthusiastic, and once she was, she put her doctorate aside and devoted herself for some 6 months. No, it's been a year now, a year of full devotion to this project. She makes all possible connections. She has connected my intuition with real science, with examples, with explanation. There are just wonderful people here. They are wonderful, Gretzky would say, because they maintain the love for the game. This is the norm in Israel. You do what you do not because of the money. You do it because you love it. And we are taught to pursue our passion and maintain our love for the game. Let me move on to what Gretzky defined as childish enthusiasm. True scientists are expected to be mature and sober, to be rational and objective. This is the norm in German science in the US as well. But in Israel, that's not the case. Just as Israeli scientists maintain love for the game, they also maintain their inner child, their emotionality active. As a brain scientist told me, we always boast about our wonderful creativity because we allow our crazy thoughts into the open, and we take pride in making something out of nothing. When I met my German colleagues, I felt like an unruly child. Other scientists spoke about an Israeli propensity for intellectual courage. The descriptions of their intellectual style sound like fearless kids on a daredevil ride. They engage in stuff that scientists in Germany are too cautious taking or do not dare to think about. In comparison, their childish courage, they say, allows them to go into unknown realms. It allows them to venture into new areas and connect ideas that others deem to be in disconnect. As a physicist explained, I would say something like this. I think German research is very basic and systematic, and I like it, but in a way, it curtails their imagination. I mean, they don't take big risks. Look, German high-tech is less successful than the Israeli high-tech scene because they fear failing. You are not allowed to make mistakes in Germany. For us Israelis, what are the chances of success for a startup? Out of 10, 9 fail. Only 1 succeeds. But when we fail, we try again and again, and finally we succeed. The point is that Israelis do not fear failure. Israeli startups and Israeli scientists pay little price for trying and failing. Rather, we are encouraged to take bold risks. Like children, Israelis do not rationally calculate what might be the consequences of failure. We just push on. In 1 out of 10 attempts, we get a hit. This is why more than 300 multinational companies decided to station their R&D centers in Israel. They know that Israelis push the envelope of knowledge. They know that while Israel may not be a top engineering environment, its culture pushes the spirit of innovation to its hilt. So yes, there's something childish about Israelis, surely in comparison with German soberness and with American systematic approaches. Israelis find little obstacles in venturing across predefined boundaries. They pay little respect for authority. They are clearly disobedient in facing hierarchy. They grow up in a culture that celebrates egalitarianism, autonomy, and disobedience. This is part of the Jewish tradition, with Abraham and Moses arguing with God. But it is also inculcated, for example, by the IDF, whose military ethics demands soldiers to disobey when confronting unlawful commands. This requires a tinge of chutzpah, daring to face authority and hierarchy. The case of George Floyd last week in Israel, the bystanders would have moved the cops away. We expect people to stand up in real time and challenge authority whenever a black flag rises above the scene. Authority is in defense mode. As an astrophysicist told me, in Israel, you have to play defense with your students because they are constantly on the offensive. They challenge your ideas. They do not accept your professorial cathedra as a point of honor. They push you, and you have to respond and maintain openness to their ideas. Those intellectual challenges open up new frontiers. Furthermore, my research finds that maintenance of the inner child drives Israelis to be easygoing or casual in venturing into the unknown. They are intellectually playful. They do not take knowledge seriously. They are improvisational, flexible, and fluid. The easygoing culture allows Israeli scientists to initiate new courses of research from one day to the next. You have an idea, you immediately set for testing it. According to a brain researcher, in Germany, I cannot do stuff like I do here in Israel. Let's say I have a lovely idea. I'll pick up funding from wherever, I'll do it. we'll arrange a pilot study, we'll write a small grant and go for it. It's a mindset that's completely absent there in Germany. In Germany, they do stuff very seriously, very slowly. It has lots of rights, but no, they will not look for alternatives. They will not cut corners. By looking for alternatives and by cutting through bureaucratic corners, Israeli scientists push for innovation and creativity. By maintaining an inner child, they are quick to find new paths and new possibilities. Let me go back now to my PowerPoint presentation. Now, so this is the report I was speaking about, The Love of Learning. It's a Canadian Royal Commission. And I want to go back to Dan Senor, which in a recent talk, he suggested that even 10 years after the publication of Startup Nation, the Israeli codes remain just as effective and just as inspiring. Take some 34 seconds with him again.
There's something unique about Israeli society in terms of how it develops its young people, whether it's through the Scout movement, whether it's through the Mechina program, whether it's through that crucial leadership experience that is the IDF, whether it is about living in a society with over 70 nationalities represented, and the challenges and the tensions and the frictions and the rewards that come from that experience. Young Israelis are just wired differently. And when you combine the tech with that talent, that's why the developing world is coming to Israel to say, help us solve our problem.
Great. So some might say that Dan Senor and I lack a critical take on Israeli culture. Let me fend off by saying that when, that when Wayne Gretzky was 5 years old, he came back home from a match with kids twice his age, complaining that he didn't get a trophy. Don't cry, his father said. By the time you grow up, we will not have enough room for your trophies. And I think we in Israel need to take this parental example to heart. We need to learn more to support each other. And let me finish with those words. When Wayne Gretzky joined Team Canada for the Olympic Games of 2002, he set 3 pillars: skill, creativity, teamwork. It worked perfectly for Team Canada. They got the gold. Those same pillars stand at the basis of Israeli innovation and academic excellence. I hope to have convinced you that Israeli culture supplies Israeli scientists and entrepreneurs with the tools that Canadians also found to be crucial, namely, always have love for the game, always maintain childish enthusiasm. Thank you very much.
Well, I know that the virtual applause doesn't quite resonate all the way through, but Gad, that was fantastic. I have goosebumps, and so I would happily, and we need to make it happen sometime, take you out for dinner and really drill deep on this. But what we're going to do here is I only get to ask you one question, really as a transition, and in that time, what I'm asking the 129 participants that are on this, that have had the privilege of listening in the last 15 or so minutes to Gad, please put your questions in the Q&A function. You'll see it at the bottom of your Zoom series of headshot panels. And then what we'll do is we'll take those questions and transfer them across the panel. So Gad, there's a lot of things I could ask you, and I was making some notes. I didn't know you were going to use Wayne Gretzky as a kind of a central pillar in your talk. And you didn't know that I know more about Wayne Gretzky than I ought to as an Englishman. But I have been in Canada for 24 years. So here's where my question goes. My wife grew up 2 doors from Wayne Gretzky on Veradi Avenue in Brantford, Ontario, right? And here's the question though, and it's a little bit of a bittersweet question, is what I do know is that Wayne Gretzky, although he may be revered now, at the age of 13, he was chased out of his own town, right, and had to go and be billeted away from his family in Toronto because there was envy and jealousy amongst not only the parents of the other teams because he scored so many goals and had the puck so much, but also the parents of the children on his own team, right? He was chased away. And so how does a society embrace not envy when they see the passion that leads to innovation and creativity? There you go. You maybe weren't expecting that question.
Yeah, but you know, I did see quite a few movies about Gretzky, and I saw the critiques in the community, and that he had to run away to Toronto initially. And just this week, I uploaded a YouTube talk on seeing the parental support. I made a YouTube talk about support and the necessity for support in Israeli academia. And surprisingly, I got more than 1,000 views within 2 days, and people were shooting at me support questions and sending me stories, horror stories about not being supported. And I do think it's a challenge in competitive situations that how you develop an individual within a group that is basically competitive. And I think it's a challenge. It's never easy. I come from individual sports. I'm a long distance runner, and we have the myth of the lonely distance runner, and we mostly run alone. Teamwork is another thing altogether. But let me leave you with this idea. The book Startup Nation celebrated the Israeli army, and the Israeli army is a place where teamwork is crucial, and Israeli scientists are taught to be team players in the Israeli army, and then they move on to Israeli academia, and they are team players. And when they arrive for the US for their postdoc, or they serve as professors here, they are really surprised by the competitive nature and the non-collaborative nature of American science in comparisons to Israeli science, which is way more collaborative and way more building on teamwork. But surprisingly, this is taught in the Israeli military.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Gad. Well, look, I see some questions coming up in the chat channel, and I'll go to those momentarily. But just on the theme that we've been on about encouraging teamwork, and particularly at a younger age, it seems like a good segue to go to Sarah, if I can. And Sarah, you know, some of the work that you've been doing that we mentioned just briefly at the very beginning in elementary schools. I wonder if you could maybe just share with the audience what your insights have been from the work you've been doing with elementary school students around entrepreneurship, and maybe what you can say about the reaction from parents as well.
Absolutely. I'm very excited I get to talk about that. What I wasn't expecting to get to talk about elementary school entrepreneurs today. So SFU works with two programs, one in elementary school and one in high school. The first is called Power Play, which teaches entrepreneurial skills and entrepreneurial mindset in particular to children in elementary school. And the second one, Youth Entrepreneurship Leadership Launchpad, is actually a program where SFU partnered with Yale to become the first university in Canada to give university credit for high school entrepreneurship, because the program was of such high quality. And also because we felt that universities weren't doing enough to encourage students to take entrepreneurial classes in high school. They were taking them as electives, and didn't seem fair to make students just struggle or to make extra work for something we know we need in them. So these programs work to inspire not only students trying to create companies, but that quick trial and failure. So there was a documentary called Mindset Matters on Power Play. And one of the students said he now sees his brain as a factory, and the factory is opening new wings. And this is what we call the growth mindset, this idea that we can learn and we can take on challenges. And one of the things we've done a white paper on this program, and what we were finding was what students learn is really their own capability and their own capacity. And it builds up that risk tolerance, and it builds up that desire to do things on your own. And also, one of the things that I think is so beautiful about entrepreneurship is that there's no one right answer. You get to use your own strengths. And so you're never feeling behind the rest of your classmates because you can use whatever you're good at. And so the other thing we're seeing is that this is what's the entrepreneurial mindset is: being collaborative, being imaginative, being not afraid to fail. Those are all the things that we are when we're kids. So it was so interesting to hear that unruly child comment, because one, I often feel like an unruly child in the room, but that's where I love to be, with these children who have this unleashed in them. So we have it. We just, unfortunately, a lot of the systems we have take it out of our kids in time. And so this is one of the things that we're working on, is how do we continue to unleash that and cultivate it through the whole process? Because then you don't have to worry about putting it back in at the university level.
Sarah, that's fascinating, and I think we should probably be kind of having the next upcoming talk kind of start with the work you're doing in that video, which I've been fortunate to see. I don't know if there's a link to it we can share, but if there is, that might be kind of helpful for people, because we often see our kind of students, even when they arrive as undergrads at university, having had the creativity knocked out of them. So just before, actually, just on this theme, before I head to the Q&As from the audience, Yossi, you I think have got some thoughts that you can share for us about teamwork and cross-continent work, which I think kind of takes us into a different kind of angle. Please, you just need to put you're on mute.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment about teamwork. I think one of the key unique feature of the Israeli cultural innovative way is the ability to work in a team or partnerships. You will see from many Mobileye and others that you have usually 2 or 3 partners that started a company, and the recognition that you cannot do everything yourself, the recognition that you can fully rely on teamwork, on friends, and throughout the way. And I think this is part of the early education that brings entrepreneurship into a better success rate. For example, a scientist is not really an innovative financier, or if the technology doesn't fall within the draws of Wall Street funding, you will never get funded or establish your business in North America. So if you find an innovator from the other side, not the idea itself, but let's say how to market it or how to push it forward, or in my case, how to progress with clinical trials for a drug device combination, etc. It is a benefit. And I think in this era of internet and phone lines and flight open, hopefully will resume, cross-continent partnership is possible and is encouraged, because it brings, you can work 24 hours on your project, 12 hours here, 12 hours east. Thank you.
Okay, yes, there's a whole series of kind of points there that we kind of will try to weave in as we go forward later. But I think, it's certainly one of the things I see kind of within Canadian technology startups is very often people become insular prematurely, and so this kind of idea about building partnerships internationally and across cultures earlier is very thought-provoking. And I'm going to go to some of the questions that I get to see kind of popping up in from the participants, and I'll just try and kind of tee these up. And some of them I'll look for a volunteer to take, others I might direct. I mean, the first one I'm going to direct to Gilad if he's willing to take it. And by the way, if I put you on the spot and you'd rather pass it on, I'm sure that one of the other panelists will take it. But Gilad, there's a question here from one of our participants, Mark Betteridge. He says he spent a week in Israel in 2012 on a business delegation. How do we improve the risk tolerance of Canadians in order to move forward on all fronts?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I've been working with hundreds of entrepreneurs here in Canada and with hundreds of entrepreneurs in Israel, and it's obviously you can see very easily that culture eats strategy for breakfast many times. On the other end, I have to say that entrepreneurial thinking and innovation, it's a culture for itself. And once people getting into that, the culture, they leave the other culture behind. And the process, I think, if you want to provoke Canadian to take more risk, that is a task. I think it's coming basic on to the question how much people trust the government. So if you look at innovations around the world, you're going to see that as much people trust the government less, the more and they have more they have more motivation to innovate. And I'm not sure it's a good sign. So every pro or every good point that we put toward that, have a negative one in the other end. The main thing that I want to say that to create an entrepreneurial culture, it's take a lot from the individual, regardless the culture that they're growing in, and the process is very interesting. What I saw in common in US, in Canada, in Europe, and in Israel, it's a process that people having once they start to understand who they are, so they start to uncover their own purpose and their own uniqueness. It's a journey that I think every successful entrepreneur have when you actually go to the process that you understand better who you are and what is your strength and what is the gift that you want to share with others, and really understand in depth your uniqueness. The second stage is the ability to express that. So when you go to work, you're expressing your uniqueness. And the entrepreneurial culture and the entrepreneurial way force you to do that. You cannot be entrepreneur without actually allow yourself or give yourself the permission to express yourself. The third point is adding value to others. So basically how excited people become. That is the source of happiness. I think for all of us, this is why some of us become parents and some of us do something, other meaningful stuff in the world, because giving or adding value to others become a big passion. So if you uncover your own purpose and motivation and uniqueness, and you find way to express yourself in an authentic way, and you add value to others, you joining to the culture of entrepreneurship. And this culture becomes stronger than the culture that around you. So I find lots of similarity between different entrepreneurs from different backgrounds and different cultures, because once they stepping into the world of entrepreneurship and they become ones, that's what define them. And they become their own subculture regardless to the place they born in, came from.
So Gilad, there's a lot of things that are resonating for me as I listen to you, but it strikes me that from what you're saying that it requires individuals to drive the way and then people to gather around them. I mean, when we use that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. A lot of CEOs are still left saying, but how do I create it, or how do I bottle it? What I took away from what you were saying is individuals need to step up. Is that too simple, or is that a reasonable characterization?
No, I think you're not far from my point. Is basically as much as you work inside of you, you can impact outside and grow. I had the opportunity to work with very shy, introvert Israelis and with very bold Canadians. So, generalization working to some extent. and then I think once you put yourself and with boots on the ground and become entrepreneurs, so basically you create something out of nothing, and you facing the challenge of doing that, you join a culture of entrepreneurship that becomes stronger than the culture that you came in from.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so you surround yourself with like-minded people as well, not like-minded as in a single kind of a single intellectual approach, but in terms of kind of cultural ambition. Yes. Okay. Just before we move on, and momentarily, I have a question from the panel for Gad, but I just want to kind of get some brief comments from Sarah on this particular point that we've been on now. I know that it's an area close to your thoughts.
Absolutely. I just wanted to talk a bit about the other side of that, which is how you set the conditions, because there is a focus on the individual, and absolutely it needs to be awakened and unleashed to the individual. But there are things we can do. I mean, talking about what Canada has done, there's a reason we called it the Inclusive Innovation Agenda. And if you look at research done out of actually Oxford University, they looked at what kills entrepreneurial culture in universities, and it was that people don't feel included. Most universities, entrepreneurship is seen as something for business or tech. And if you're not part of that, you're not invited. And if you're not invited, then you don't share ideas, you don't trust people. And if you don't trust, you don't share ideas. And it becomes a vicious cycle. So there is an opportunity by proactively going out and finding people who you don't think are going to be included, who don't feel included, who may not speak entrepreneurship in the language that you speak. And by changing that language and by going out and getting those people and groups that don't feel included, you can create the conditions to bring more people in. So I think there's both creating the conditions for that person to arise and then supporting that person.
Yeah, very interesting, Sarah. And I think, and you know, I know I'm guilty of this myself. Is sometimes when you're being an innovator, you're so passionate in such a hurry that you can end up kind of like running fast with only one or two people and not bringing people along with you. So well said. Okay, I'm going to go to some of the other questions that I can see. There's a number now that I'm backing up. So sorry, I'm going to do my best with your name, Hari Hararan Mahadevan. I probably have mangled that, and you can send me a kind of a flame mail later, but I did my best. It's a question for Gad. Visiting Israel personally was an incredible experience. I wanted to understand what success means to an Israeli entrepreneur. Is it selling on the company or constantly chasing the next innovation? Yeah, thank you.
That's quite interesting. I mentioned there's a contrast between an engineering management culture and an entrepreneurial one. And most Israeli entrepreneurs seek to have an idea that blooms very fast, and they want to sell the company. You don't have a very large Israeli companies that become Facebook or Google, because most Israelis would say, management is not for me. I am for the ideas. So they run after an exit. They want to create a firm and then to sell it and move on to the next idea. So in Israel, the ideal is serial entrepreneurship rather than one shot. You do it again and again and again as long as you have good ideas and a good team, and you create a new company and you sell it, rather than thinking like a Mercedes or, you know, a NASA or a Facebook, we are going to run a big company. That's not the mentality, or that's not the culture in Israel. We are rather opting for serial and entrepreneurial activities.
Okay, super, Gad. Thank you. I'm going to start to move down some of the other questions, because there's a number coming in now, and there's a variety. So, you know, with many of them, what I'm going to do is just go to kind of one person, unless you kind of feel a real kind of urgent need to come in, and then you can either kind of, as a panelist, you can either message me directly, or you can just wave, or just put your mic on and start talking like we would really live, please. So the next one is from Karima S. Sabah, and the question here, and I think anybody who'd like to take this, please do. But the question is, how integrated and inclusive is the innovation community in Israel, and how does it deal with the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic? So I don't know if anybody would like to kind of go first on that.
Yossi?
Yeah, I would like, I don't know if you know, but I have Palestinian workers in my company, and it's a multinational, my company. It's not my company anymore, it's a public company, and I have less than 1%. So, but the company that we started have Palestinians and Arab, had Arab workers. It's international. I think that there is little attention to the political situation, and despite of the political situation, there is entrepreneurship, and the clinical trial that we are running is in Soroka Medical Center, which serves the Bedouin community, and it serves the underprivileged, and it serves the Palestinian community. And we had in our clinical trials participants from this community. So I think, I'm not in Israel, but the way I look at it, it's that there is a little segregation and a little effect of the political situation. And if there is an effect, it's for the positive way of inclusiveness and crossing barriers.
So I would add that it depends on the field, because in the high-tech sector, most entrepreneurs arrive through Israeli military elite units, in technological units. And most Palestinians do not take part in the IDF, and the Israeli Arabs are not serving in the IDF, so they don't have the opportunity to serve, to join the social networks of entrepreneurs, which actually begin at the age of 16 also. People opting to serve in those elite technology units in the Israeli army begin preparing together, and then they continue for at least 4 years of serving together, and then during their military service, they already decide on a company, and they just go out of the army and start a company. So Israeli Palestinians have out of this game, which is a central game in the Israeli startup scene.
Okay, great. You know, I just learned a bunch from both of you, and it's one of the kind of the byproducts of kind of being a moderator on a panel like this. So thank you. I'm going to switch gear a little here. I don't have I didn't know we had anonymous attendees. Anyway, we have an anonymous attendee, but it's a good question, so you'll know who you are. The question is how do Canadian university faculty become more collaborative when they are incentivized to work on their own and continually publish papers in order to advance their careers? And I think we could say that about academics kind of everywhere. So I think, you know, the comparisons with the Israelis may be a good one. So please, who's going to take that for us?
I think this is a right question, right in time, especially if you are pre-tenure. It's much easier when you get your tenure, you can do whatever you want. But the thrill to do entrepreneurship exists before you get your tenure. And I think you need to find your like minds and just develop your niche and do it together. It's harder, but it can be done.
Yeah, please, go on, Sarah, jump in. You're just on mute. Yeah, there you are. Good. Thanks.
Sorry, my whole life right now is being told I'm on mute.
Sorry, too quick.
No, greatly appreciate it. I love this question because we've been actively trying to cultivate entrepreneurial mindset in faculty. Although SFU has sort of a hippie mentality from the 60s. And so we have a lot of that sort of what Gad was calling the interdisciplinary, disobedient culture, which I think helps. But one of the things we've found from releasing a program called Invention to Innovation, which helps grad students develop their research into startup ideas, which feeds into CDL, as with Paul. What we see is that by sparking that in our students, faculty members who wouldn't necessarily have considered themselves entrepreneurial or be particularly interested in entrepreneurial endeavors, when you see that enthusiasm, when you see that spark and fire that Gad was talking about, it's contagious. And so we've both done that and made a habit of getting the more entrepreneurial faculty together, and soon it becomes a place that you want to be. And so making sure that it's obvious right across every faculty and also getting the students involved does make a significant difference.
No, that's really helpful, Sarah. And it reminds me, by the way, as I've done my, walking around the university research labs from the business school into the science labs. And, one of the things that initially surprised me, but really stuck with me was I asked one senior tenured researcher, why he wanted to expose his doctoral students to what I had to say about innovation and entrepreneurship, because very often people wouldn't let you in their labs because you were a distraction. Right? And he said, talented as they are, 3/4 of my doctoral students will not become academics. Right? There are not enough spaces, and so many of them will end up being underemployed and underfulfilled in industry. I have a moral responsibility to show them another pathway so that they can realize their talents. And I just share that because that to me, that stuck with me as something that, not everybody has to follow every pathway, but there are many, many talented researchers that we can harness. So great story.
Well, honestly, that was the reason behind that program, was realizing that we needed to create these pathways. It was not created to create companies. It was created because you wanted, so we get companies out of it, but you also get those nodes in the ecosystem that know how to reach back into research and draw it out. So no matter what pathway students leave with, they still do great things for commercialization.
It feels like, by the way, I don't know about everybody else on the panel, but it's starting to feel like we're having a more normal conversation and not a Zoom kind of like, okay, it's your turn. So please, let's follow the spirit of that. But I also realize, as I gave my kind of quasi quotes, that I need to kind of steal a trick from Gad's book and wear a hat each time that I am giving a quote from somebody. That's a nice play. I've got a different question here. This is from Ron Segev, and again, I'll quote. He says, "Forgive what might be a charged question, but is the culture Israeli or is it Jewish culture? The Jewish diaspora has produced many successful entrepreneurs. I don't have the data, but it's possible that community has produced more per capita than others. What are the thoughts of the panelists?" Gad, do you want to lead with that?
Yes, well, I mentioned Abraham and Moses arguing with God, and this is the Jewish tradition, right? That you do not accept authority. And, just quoting Albert Einstein, who said that he was very lucky to be born to the Jewish tradition because his own chutzpah got a legitimation, and he was daring to have very radical ideas pushed into the academic world. So definitely the impact of Jewish scientists compared to the impact of Israeli scientists is much larger. Israel being a survival society is more mundane. It's the projects tend to be short-term rather than long-term. Many of them revolve around challenges that the state faces. Therefore, you will not find big philosophers as Jewish philosophers outside of Israel. You will not find big philosophers. You will not find big social theorists who are known throughout the world. You will find people in the sciences mostly. But again, if you go to the Nobel Prizes, Jews won way more Nobel Prizes than Israelis did. And the number is basically the same. So yeah, something in Israel pushes for the short term rather than big ideas that transform the entire world.
Super, Gad, thank you. That's a nice comprehensive answer. And I'm going to switch things slightly. I'm going to use my position with the mic and ask a question I wanted to ask Gilad. So, obviously, as you'd expect anybody moderating, I'm looking at the panelists' backgrounds ahead of time, so I know who I'm moderating. And as I listened to Gad's talk earlier and about passion and not killing the spirit in the boy or in the child, I should say, I was thinking about your kind of multiple social entrepreneurship startups, Gilad. And certainly as an educator, what I see, as many of us see, is that the passion of our young people as students around entrepreneurship is very often drawn towards social impact. And so I wanted to kind of, sitting as you do on this kind of intersection between social entrepreneurship and education, is there something we can harness there to develop people's passions for innovation more broadly through their life?
No, I'm not on mute. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. Yes, I think that the main challenge that we have as a global community is the future of work that going to force lots of change. And I think the last crisis that we all been through is just accelerating and amplifying this uncertainty that comes with that. And I think we see a lot of this fear and unclear situation that we are in as humanity everywhere now. And we're responding to that in different ways in different places. But I think that the main thing that happened, we call it future of work, or we have different names for that. That as humanity, we in a process that skills being commoditized. And when skill being commoditized, people that identify with the skills feel left behind. And this is so impactful and significant and deep, because when you have education system that allow you to identify with your skills, and when the AI take your skills, and you feel left behind, what people try to do is to go after leaders that offering a vision in the past. And I think Israel is good on this competition with other nations that offering, having leaders that offering a vision in the past. But if we want to have a vision in the future, I think that the main thing is to struggle against this culture that I think Israel and the States and other places today, sorry about being so charged politically, but this is a political question. And we want to look at the future in a positive way. We need to understand that as long as the AI and the future of work coming into our life, a skill being commoditized, and we will need to reinvent ourselves again and again and again. So my kids that making noise around me right now, not going to school, will have multiple careers. They will need to reinvent themselves again and again. So the entrepreneurial spirit and the innovation spirit will become part of each one of us. It's not going to be, we're not going to be divided to entrepreneurs and to people who work for 20 years for the same company. We all are going to be in this place. So the ability for oneself or for the individual and the communities to encourage innovation, to spark that thing in any individuals, because we're going to be dependent on that. And I think that is the main skill. If you ask me what is the main skill of the future, I would say it's your will. It's not your skill. It's what we call soft skills. It's become essential. It's become the most important thing whenever you live. If you live in Israel or Canada or China or Africa, that will become the main thing. And I think our education needs to start to be focused on that, because the fact that you went to university, had your bachelor degree, not going to support your career for more than 2-3 years. So in the world that when your skill need to change all the time and you need to reinvent yourself, not just a product or service, it's a world that as humanity, if we want to have a positive future and we don't want to drag ourselves after these new leaders that compete who offer vision farther in the past. We need to start to reinvent ourselves as a core of our education and as a core of our human culture.
Yeah, look, Gilad, that's really, really thought-provoking. And momentarily, I'm going to pass on to Gad on the same subject. But I mean, just my observations and commentary. And I'm still trying to work out whether I'm just getting older and a bit more skeptical about things, or whether the students that are coming in kind of as 18, 19, 20 years old, I find that I'm expecting them to be risk embracing. And my observations are that for the most part, they are more they're more risk averse. They have got less resilience, and they want certainty. So anyway, I think that's a real dilemma for us as a society. And you know, anyway, certainly what I'm seeing kind of in my kind of classes. Gad, you had some thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I had a tangent on that question of social entrepreneurship. Some successful Israeli people who sold their company, made a lot of money, turned from tech entrepreneurship to social entrepreneurship, and create NGOs, mostly in education, that seeks to give back to society. And I'll tell you one story of a person who sold a company in the US, went back to Israel, and created an NGO that buys old buses, takes away the seats from the bus, installs science labs in the bus, take a retired driver and 2 PhD students from universities, and they drive to the farthest corners of Israel to teach kids who have no other encounter with science. Twice a week in the afternoon in an informal setting, they teach them science, and at the end of the day, they bring the kids back to the university, so kids know that at the end of the road, when they grow up, they can come to a university and have a scientific career. So this is an example, but it happens quite a lot that tech entrepreneurs turn to, I spoke about serial entrepreneurship. Some of them move from the tech to the social scene and make a big difference in Israeli education.
Okay, really, that's interesting to kind of put it that way around. So thanks for that, Gad. I'm going to move to a different question. It's actually not written as a question, but it's a statement, but I'm going to frame it as a question. So Alice Fisher, thank you. She's let us know that the PhD dissertation is on the Israeli innovation system and why it is so successful, including its weaknesses, and states the Israeli government invests more on industrial R&D than on academic R&D, while Canada and other countries invest more on academic R&D, which never gets developed. And so it's made as a statement, but I'm going to kind of ask maybe Yossi to start with this one, and then see if anybody else wants to kind of chime in. What are your observations on that statement?
I have to agree that the investment is on scientific R&D, but it's rarely developed, so it's more highly risky than the industrial R&D. However, from my experience, it was really a challenge, an uphill battle to support let's say, the middle stage. Once the idea is already carved and the prototype already existed, it was an uphill battle in Canada. And for me, the breakthrough went when my partners in Israel took over and facilitated. So I have to agree that my impression from the small binoculars that I use, that the notion is right.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. But I appreciate the flavor that you put to that with the example. And I don't know, Gilad or Sarah or Gad, do you want to comment on this? Is there anything?
I can give a comment. I mentioned the central role of the Israeli army. The Israeli army has a program called Talpiyot, and they take youngsters at the age of 17, 18, and rather than sending them to regular service, they send them to Hebrew University to study math and physics. And then once they finish their undergraduate studies, they go to the army and serve as weapons development teams and nuclear development teams or whatever. So in my interviews, I was asking, are we as Israeli science, are we losing the best minds to the military? And the answer I got back is that no, they come back to the Weizmann Institute once they finish their army service, or they come back to Hebrew U, or they lead Harvard's astrophysics department, and they become top scientists, and we don't lose them. I agree, most of R&D in Israel is in basically the military, and Israeli academia is tied to the programs of the European Union in terms of research. And it's a kind of a post-Holocaust phenomena that there are lots of joint programs with Germany. So Germany and Israel are the real partners in terms of research collaborations because of the past trauma.
Well, and given your talk, your comments in your talk earlier about the differences in attitude and culture between Germany and Israel, and kind of having different backgrounds and outlooks from the partnership, that shed some light on why it might be productive. I mean, one could have a follow-up question and ask who should Canadian researchers partner with.
Right.
Maybe that's left hanging, but I mean, I think one of the things one notes walking around research labs in Canadian universities is how many of the innovative researchers were not born in the country, and maybe that is part of what fuels our innovation engine. Okay, I'm going to switch to a different question. Aaron Levitt has asked a question directed initially to you, Gad, and then to others on the panel as they would like. So here's the question. The necessity to know oneself as a requirement for entrepreneurship, how does one square this with the youth of many successful entrepreneurs, or the shy ones that you referred to?
Well, let me remain in the realm that I was pushing on for a lot of this talk about the army service as a prelims to an Israeli career. For example, the program I was speaking about, Talpiyot, requires people to become officers. Officers means they have to study leadership and social responsibility. So even though they might be shy, they are taught the skills of leading groups of people, which might be, I interviewed a mathematician here in the US, an Israeli mathematician, and he told me I was 23-year-old when I was leading the 15 brightest mathematical minds in Israel. Where else in academia would I have the opportunity to lead the 15 best mathematics minds? So the army creates those settings that you study leadership and you study social responsibility. Just a minor example, now with the pandemic, the elite units, the combat elite units were sent into ultra-Orthodox cities to provide food for families which were, cut off from chains of supply. So this is something that is natural for elite units, that they have a social mission that they need to fulfill besides being the best warriors or whatever, So social entrepreneurship and social responsibility is part of the Israeli tradition.
God, that's really helpful. Yeah, Gilad, I see your hand and I was about to come to you. I mean, this is a natural for you, so please add your comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the impact of the Israeli army on the Israeli entrepreneurship is true, but is unfortunate. And I don't want to recommend every country around the world now to have armies so they can become better in innovation. I think that exposure to accountability, experiential education can totally replace that in a positive way. And I think this is about create more opportunities in schools and in after-school program to young people wherever they are to learn about being accountable and to have more experiential learning in many ways. Because the thing about innovation that does not come from your head, you have to have boots on the ground, you have to try, and then you need to think about it and learn this cycle. And what school provide usually is the education that go from your neck up and you're stuck there and you cannot learn from your experience. So as much as we widen that experience and we make it wider and more accessible to other people, because this is the main thing that you learn in the army. You learn to be accountable. You learn that you have an action and that action creates something around you. And now you have to deal with that. And slowly, you need to be better over time. And this is all what entrepreneurship is about in many ways. And I think we can create platforms like that. We can create platforms that encourage individuals to engage with groups in peers. We can encourage them to reflect. We can encourage them to learn, and we can show them that they can be better over time when they're thinking about something, experiment with that, reflecting on that, and redo till you become better. And I just want to say that every pro with the culture have the cons. So the Israeli culture that I obviously product of it, don't have the systematic approach. It's like we don't go, as God said, to short term, I am a serial entrepreneurs. And it's some of that because we don't have the systemic way to build something for a long time. And this is why collaboration between highly innovation people and people who really know to have the discipline around system is very important. This is why the Israelis sold the companies to companies in North America, because the system there in place. So every innovative or every pro have the con next to it. Every light has its shade. And I think collaboration around that is true, and it's possible and positive between different cultures and between different people that all obviously represent them. So some of us is better in research, some of us better in implementation. And I think as much as you know yourself, that was the question, you know what you have and you give yourself permission to be your authentic self. And then you know what you miss. You don't pretend, and I think pretending is part of the problem, that we try to be good in everything. We're not good in everything. Not as a nations, not as a cultures, and not as individuals. So as much as you understand what is your gift, where is your skill, where is your uniqueness, you can find the partner that can, or the partners that can, work with you. And that we need to learn to be more open about that and to teach kids and youth and young people to stop to pretend that we're good in everything. This thing is a killer for innovation. We need to have this strength-based approach that help people to be focused on what they're good at and collaborate with other people that good in other stuff. And sometimes just to accept your weakness and to collaborate with someone that have a strength in this place, create collaboration that spark innovation. The last sentence that I'm going to say, we usually teach people to focus the learning where they're weak. This is classic in school. I was very bad in math, so I put in the math class until I didn't feel stupid, and then he left me. So the habit is to help you to focus on your weakness. And I think we need to have the opposite approach. We need to help people to focus on the strengths and collaborate with other strengths so we can create something really unique. So we had a lot to do with, and hopefully without the army.
So thank you.
Can I build on that point?
Yeah, you will. I was going to say, Sarah, I was about to say, this is a lovely panel. You're making my job easy because Gad set up Gilad and Gilad set up Sarah. But what I was going to say is I pass it off to you, Sarah, as well as commenting as you're intending. There is an additional question I think I want to weave in here from Tal Jaris, which is saying, in this area or on this topic, are there any comments specific to gender differences? So, I mean, if you could layer that maybe over the top of your response.
Ah, perfect. Actually, I think I can weave these together quite nicely. So I do want to build on what Gilad said, because this building a culture where you can seek out people who can do what you want to do, can help you do what you want to do, but not have clones of the same people. So often when we talk about, for example, science entrepreneurs, you teach business skills to science entrepreneurs and you somehow think you'll build this person who will do science and entrepreneurship together. But that's not how businesses work, right? You have a CEO, you have a CTO, you have a diverse C-suite. And even if you teach someone who's spent their years in their life being a scientist, because they have that passion and they love it, they may want to see what they do commercialized, but do you now want to be the person who goes out and raises funding and the person who wants to talk to customers? Or do you want someone who's really good at that so something beautiful can be done, but you're not necessarily the person who's going to be doing those things? And so building these interdisciplinary teams is hugely important. But it's also this interesting positive cycle. So we built a program called Technology Entrepreneurship at SFU, which was originally between the business school and mechatronics engineering. And they were supposed to build entrepreneurial ventures together. And for the first few years, it didn't work. And we went in and talked about why it didn't work. And the short answer was, we hadn't spent any time building a trusting culture. We had just told them to work together. And so they were from such different worlds, they were scared to say what they didn't know. And so they never asked each other. So when we had asked one young man, you know, what's frustrating you? He said, I still don't know I don't know what this was, but I still don't know what this thing is. But I'm supposed to know tech. And so I just turned to his partner and said, what is that? He said, tiny radio. And like, you guys have been working together for a year and you never asked what you were building. And it was because they didn't feel safe. And so we revised that program to create a trusting culture and get them to appreciate each other and teach each other things before they even started their projects. And at the end of that year, we asked them if they had any feedback. And what they said was, we're going to need more people. We're going to need computer scientists. We're going to need people from the arts. We definitely need designers, because now we've realized how much more powerful we are when we're in interdisciplinary teams. We don't want to become those people. We want to be able to work with those people. And so learning that value is really important. But what we're also seeing, to get into your next question, is people don't come to entrepreneurship for the same reasons. And so SFU recently launched a school of sustainable energy engineering. And it has significantly more women in it than most engineering programs. And what they credit is that they didn't focus on, here, let's play with tech. They said, here's the problems you get to solve in the world. Here's how to have a meaningful career. And so focusing not on what us tech people would necessarily get excited about, but figuring out how you might draw people in based on what they care about became really important. I know as soon as Gad started talking, I wrote down a quote from one of the top Canadian social entrepreneurs, Alec Mansky, who said, necessity is the mother of invention, but the other parent is love. And so if you speak love to those communities, to those other people, and show how being involved can help them do what they want to do, make that difference, makes a huge difference to getting diversity in gender and other types of diversity into those programs that have typically been dominated by one type of person.
Super, Sarah. That's great. Thank you very much. And I can see this. We're not going to get through all the questions in the panel, but we wouldn't if we were in a live room either. There are nearly always more hands than there is time to cover things. But what I want to do, just to, I want to ask one final question from participants to Gad, and then I'm going to go around the whole panel one more time from myself, and then we'll aim to wrap this by 11:30 Pacific time in about 7 minutes time. So the final question for you, Gad, it comes from Jonathan Medowski, and his question is does inequality play a role in fostering entrepreneurship? Does inequality play a role?
Yeah, it does, because as I mentioned, a lot of the high-tech scene in Israel passes through elite military units, and social inequalities create inequalities in access to those elite units. So definitely, just as Israeli academia is, I would say, not multicultural, so is the high-tech scene in Israel is not overtly multicultural. It is, at the top, it is very tough to get people from peripheral areas to win places, and you need a lot of support for people. And there are special platforms, but they don't change the entire scene. When I say support platforms, is people from, let's say, peripheral Palestinian or Mizrahi backgrounds who live far from Tel Aviv and Herzliya, which are the centers of the tech scene in Israel. There are platforms to help those in the periphery, but they cannot really change the entire scene, which is monochromatic, as my interviewees say.
Okay, Gad, thank you. That's a really helpful answer. So here's what I want to do in our last 5 minutes, and just going to give you a little notice. I'll start with Yossi, then go Gilad, and then Sarah, and then finish with Gad. But I'm going to put a question to you. There's got some flexibility for you for about how you answer it. But in the context of what we've been talking about today, kind of framing or creating culture for innovation and entrepreneurship, what do you wish that the 20-year-old you had known or had done differently? So Yossi, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but there's a lot of ways you can answer. There's a lot of ways you can answer that.
Yeah, at 20 years old, I was in the army and I was in officer's course, so I wouldn't change that.
You can be 25 if you want.
I was still in the army, but
oh, okay.
I started my university studies after the army. So what I would have changed maybe was not to pay attention too much to the progressing in the academic track because of personal fulfillment. I think that personal fulfillment came to me more than the academic discoveries, rather than the things that mature to something tangible that people can use or can understand what I'm doing. So if I'm looking back at my career, I would like it to be more translational, and I'm trying to do so. And I think that's part of the entrepreneurial spark that gives you the thrill and the joy to see things that are not in the ivory tower of academia. At the beginning, I was just targeted to the academia to excel there.
Well, thank you. And that's a nice reframing of the question, and it was indeed the spirit of the question. So thank you. So Gilad, and then Sarah, and then Gad.
And when you ask Israelis about the 20, you need to be careful.
Yeah, no. Well, anyway, there you go. I just learned something.
Yeah, it's very different than North America. Yeah, I would just when I was 20, I just want to take 1 year later and to finish with the army. I was a soldier in the first Intifada, so that wasn't fun. What I would do, I did it basically. I would pursue my passion, but I would give myself more permission to do that. My passion was around education because I've been kicked out from high school. And I was out of the army and I decided to do something with education and inclusivity. And everybody around me told me two things. How are you going to be an educator if you don't have a high school diploma? And the second thing that they told me, like, if you choose education, how you ever going to make money? And I came from poverty. And I have decided to go full on that route. But honestly, I had a sleepless night. So I know now that when you go with your passion and your strengths, you can do everything. And it's about, mainly it's about self-permission. It's about, you know, raising your self-awareness and acceptance, and raising yourself, the ability to manage yourself and to make sure that you grow over time. So that would the main advice that I would give to myself. Give myself more permission and don't listen to anyone that try to tell me that I should do other stuff that I am more appropriate for me. And I think, honestly, two things just to follow up on that. First is it was a question about gender that I think we just touched base lightly. And I think, especially in the Israeli culture, it's a big gap that I think we created because of the army. And I think that working with lots of women entrepreneurs here in Canada and in North America, I think is a very, very interesting blocks that blocking women from getting to these places. But once they're there, it's amazing. So much different, so much fun, so much more flexible and doable and talkable and involve the full expression. So I think we need to do whatever we can to include more women in this world, because that's gonna be the significant change that we all are looking for.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Nicely said. Sarah, the advice you'd give your younger self?
Yes, well, I wouldn't change a lot because I got to be on this panel today and I learned a ton. But when I was thinking about this, I sort of have one answer that leads to another. And one is, like so many people, I wish I had the confidence to ask more questions when I was 20, because I wasn't necessarily looking to find my passion. I was going down a path that I thought was the right path. And because if I had asked more questions, I also would have asked, as someone who went into science and then switched over to business, no one ever bothered telling me there were these things called joint degrees. And so as a woman who came as one of two women who took shop in high school and who got into university in sciences, no one said, don't you want to keep some of that? So it wasn't until I got into my master's and PhD in Cambridge, where we were doing these interdisciplinary studies, that I learned the power of and the beauty of being someone who gets to walk between all of these worlds and make all of these connections in order to make a difference. And I wish that had started in my 20s, and that would have started with asking questions like, can I do all of these things?
You know what, I kind of feel like a bit of everybody's answers is me as well. So, you know, kind of, you know, they often say, you know, we ought to not kind of make the same mistakes that people made before us. And I feel like there are recurring themes here. And yet, you know, I'm not always sure if I get through to my students when I kind of say, you know, give them this sort of advice. You know, I fear that I just look like their boring father or parent, you know. And so I think one way, one of the things I keep thinking about is who is the person to be the communicator, to be effective in that messaging. So anyway, that's my reflection, but I resonate with a lot of what's said. Gad, you're our keynote speaker for today. You led the theme for the panel, for the talk and what the panel's been talking about. So please, your advice to your younger self, or just your advice to us as the final comments before we hand back, so that Dina can kind of wrap us up.
So just to follow up on the others, I arrived to Hebrew U November 1982, immediately after the war in Lebanon. My first class was Sunday evening, and we were sent to the library. And so Monday morning, 9 a.m., I am at the library, and I open my first academic paper, and I say to myself, this is what I want to do. I will do it better. And I think what Hebrew U allowed me throughout these years is to maintain my love for the game, as I said, and to keep my inner child. I am still very playful in what I do. So my talk is exactly, I do what I do. I'm in love with what I do, and I'm passionate about that. And I think Hebrew U and academia generally is home to us children.
Well, you know what? That's a wonderful way to finish. This has been a real highlight for me. I wasn't sure what to expect. I was happy to happy to help out and honored to be asked to do so. But it's been my genuine pleasure. It's been, Zoom calls are not always fun. This one's been fun, stimulating. So I thank all of you, and I pass back to Dina just to wrap us up for the session.
Well, we are 5 minutes over time, so I just want to thank again all the panelists, and especially thank you, Paul, for taking this task of facilitating it. It's a bit harder on Zoom rather than in a room and seeing everybody. So you did a great job. I thank you all for your time, for your goodwill, and I think that this was interesting enough that we'll do it again. So thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of the day.